As you watch this video, your body is busy making lots of cells. Some of these cells will replace cells that are dead or damaged. For example, red blood cells can only survive about 120 days, so we need to keep making more new red blood cells to replace them. If you're still growing, your body needs to make new cells so that you can get bigger. We make new cells by one cell dividing to form two identical cells. This process is called cell division. Cell division involves lots of steps, including one called mitosis. Mitosis can seem really confusing at first. However, once you understand the key steps and why they happen, it becomes much more simple. This video will focus on helping you to understand mitosis, helping you to understand what the steps are and why they happen. Each chapter will focus on a different step in mitosis. I'll also cover the steps that need to happen before and after mitosis, starting with the growth phase. Let's get started. If you're new here, welcome to BioSmash. I'm Jo. I'm a science teacher and a clinical scientist. Before you can understand mitosis, you need to have a good understanding of chromosomes and DNA. So we'll cover this first, and then the rest of the video will focus on mitosis. The nucleus contains DNA, which is our genetic material. We actually have 46 pieces of DNA inside the nucleus of each cell, and these can be arranged into 23 pairs. These pieces of DNA are called chromosomes, and we inherit our chromosomes from our parents. We actually inherit 23 of the chromosomes from our father and 23 of them from our mother, and we can see that they're arranged into pairs. If we look at this diagram of a cell, you can see the chromosomes drawn inside the nucleus. The purple chromosomes are the ones that came from the father, and the yellow chromosomes are the ones that came from the mother. During mitosis, these chromosomes need to be sorted carefully to make sure that each cell produced gets a full set of chromosomes. Before we go any further, you may have noticed that our cell only contains 4 chromosomes rather than 46. This is just to try and keep things a bit simpler so we can see what's happening. Now that we understand more about chromosomes, let's look at what happens to them during the growth phase. Before a cell can divide to make 2 new cells, it needs to copy all of the parts inside it, including the parts inside the nucleus. If our cell is going to divide into 2 cells, it will need to copy its DNA first, so that it's got a set of DNA to put into each new cell. Once each chromosome has been copied, the 2 identical copies are fastened together. It's a bit like if you photocopied a piece of paper to make 2 identical copies and then attached the 2 copies together using a paperclip. It looks something like this. We still call it a single chromosome, but now the chromosome contains 2 identical molecules of DNA fastened together. We call the identical pieces of DNA chromatids, and they're connected at the centromere, which is a bit like the paperclip. So this diagram of a cell contains 2 chromosomes, or a pair of chromosomes. When the cell divides to make 2 cells, it will need to make sure that each cell that's made gets a copy of both chromosomes. This is where mitosis comes in. So hopefully you now understand that an important part of the growth stage is making sure that all the DNA is copied. Other things happen during the growth stage. The cell grows larger, and structures inside the cell are copied, such as the mitochondria and ribosomes. After the growth stage, the cell is ready for mitosis. I will explain each step of this process in detail, but let's start with an overview. Remember that the aim of mitosis is to divide the chromosomes up so that each new cell gets a full set of chromosomes. This process starts by the chromosomes lining up down the middle of the cell and cell fibres attached to each one at the centromere. The cell fibres then pull on the chromosomes so that a copy of each chromosome gets pulled to each side of the cell. So you can see that the 2 arms of each chromosome have gone to the opposite poles or ends of the cell. A special membrane called the nuclear membrane then forms around each group of chromosomes. This creates a nucleus, so we now have 2 nuclei within the cell. Finally, the liquidy part of the cell called the cytoplasm and the cell membrane divide to make 2 separate cells. So we can see that we now have 2 identical daughter cells. The 2 identical daughter cells each contain exactly the same DNA. They've each got 4 chromosomes, or 2 pairs of chromosomes, which is also exactly the same as the parent cell that made them. By the way, if you're finding this helpful, I'd love to hear from you, particularly if you've got any ideas I could cover in future videos. Now we've covered an overview of mitosis, let's zoom in and look at each stage in detail. The first stage of mitosis is called prophase. During prophase, the cell prepares for mitosis. So I always remember P for prophase, P for prepare. The chromosomes need to be able to move to two sides of the cell. So during prophase, the nuclear membrane breaks down so that the chromosomes can move freely. When the cell is not undergoing mitosis, the DNA inside the nucleus is unwound so that the genetic code can be read. However, during prophase, the cell winds the chromosomes up tightly so that they're condensed and can be seen and sorted. It's a bit like if you're knitting and want to organise your wool. It's much easier to do it if you wind each piece of wool up into a ball. Another thing that happens during prophase is some little structures called centrioles move to each pole of the cell. Centrioles act a bit like anchors. We'll come back to that. So to summarise, during prophase, the DNA condenses, the centrioles migrate to the poles, and the nuclear membrane breaks down. I really hope you're finding this video helpful. If you are, then please do click subscribe. It will help you to find my other videos. Let's move on to step 2 of mitosis. Step 2 of mitosis is called metaphase. And as you can see in the diagram, during metaphase, the chromosomes line up down the middle of the cell. So I always remember M for metaphase, M for middle. We call the middle of the cell the equator. And you can see that spindle fibres have attached to each chromosome at the centromere. Remember, the centromere is the part of the chromosomes where the two identical DNA strands are attached together. The spindle fibres also attach to the centrioles, which are at the two poles of the cell. Now that we've covered metaphase, let's move on to the third step in mitosis. The third step is called anaphase. Remember how each chromosome is made up of two chromatids joined together at the centromere? During anaphase, those chromatids get pulled apart to opposite sides of the cell. So I remember A for anaphase, A for apart. During anaphase, the centromeres divide. This means that the two identical chromatids can each move to a different end of the cell. The chromatids are pulled to the opposite sides of the cell because the spindle fibres shorten, pulling them towards the centrioles. Let's look at the final stage of mitosis. This stage is called telophase. By telophase, you can start to see two nuclei. So I remember T for telophase, T for 2. By telophase, we start to call the two separate chromatids chromosomes because they're at separate parts of the cell. And each of those chromosomes starts to uncoil again so that the DNA can be read. A new nuclear envelope also forms around each group of chromosomes. And you can see the cell is starting to divide into two cells. This brings us on to the final phase in this video. Telophase is the final stage in mitosis, and by the end of telophase, the cell is already starting to divide. We call the process of cell division cytokinesis. Hopefully, you're now very familiar with the nucleus in this diagram. The cell membrane is found at the edge of the cell, and the cytoplasm is the liquid inside the cell. During cytokinesis or cell division, the cell membrane is pulled towards itself from each side of the cell. Eventually, this leads to the cell dividing into two separate identical cells. Hopefully, you now feel much more confident at explaining what's going on in this diagram. I really hope you found this video helpful. If you want to know more about the processes of cell division, then check out this one next. Otherwise, YouTube thinks you might enjoy this one. I really hope to see you again soon.